gay bars were our safe spaces. I grew up before everything was acceptable, and I felt like I wanted to be a part of preserving that history and giving other young people, even though it is more acceptable these days, that place that they always have to come to and be who they are and not have to worry about being judged for it. I came out in the early 90s, so the first bar I ever went to in Memphis was a place called WKRB. It was actually located about a block from here, and it was owned by a lady named Sharon Ray, who is actually the woman that I bought this bar from back in 2008. It was a time when literally we crawled over a wall and down into the back of where the back of the building was, and you had to enter from there. You didn't even go through the front door. Their windows were all covered up. I mean, it was completely like being in some kind of secret speakeasy type thing, except you didn't need a password, you just needed your girlfriend with you. I decided to bring back the windows they were behind all the boards and walls and stuff that had been built. So I decided to bring back windows. And a lot of my older customers were really freaked out. I mean, it was almost like they were terrified because you could see in. And it took them, I would say, a good couple of months to get used to it, and because they'd never been in a gay bar that you could see into.
Back in the 70s, when I was first going out to the bars, they were all beer bars, and I'm not a beer drinker. So I would nurse a couple of Coca-Colas for hours. So I actually do remember the 70s. I wanted to be pretty. So I took up drag. I was never worked really professionally. I was benefit Bertha.
The one guy that comes in here that was, he's been arrested for dressing in drag back in late 60s, early 70s, and gone to jail for performing. Preserving that, and it's part of our culture, it's part of our history, it's our heritage, and it needs a home, and so that's what we try to be.
My big claim to fame as a drag queen is that I produced and performed in 1983 or 4 a show called Old Hash, because we were not doing anything new, we were just rehashing old production numbers. It was Memphis' very first AIDS benefit, and the proceeds of that went to purchasing brochures from the CDC to distribute wherever we distributed Gay's newspaper. There was an ordinance in Memphis, and I don't know when it was passed, although a city officer during the Crump administration was quoted as saying, I don't want to see them together out at a bar, I don't even want to see them together in church. So it was very repressive, and there was a big backlash after the 1920s when things were mostly blown wide open all across the spectrum. There was a backlash in the 30s during the Depression, and so where a lot of these anti-cross-dressing ordinances cropped up nationwide. What happened was there were 2 in Memphis, one for same-sex dancing and one for cross-dressing. There was a period where, since people who cross-dressed were usually also performers, so they were on stage, and that changed things just a little bit. But there was a period when you had to wear one piece of male clothing or male underwear to be able to get up and drag. There was a very famous raid at George's when it was down here on Madison, that they took everybody to jail, and all the queens were in one cell and George Wilson was in another. But that was also the time when it became permissible for women to wear pantsuits to work. So that ordinance became unenforceable. If women were wearing trousers in the workplace, how could you enforce it otherwise?
In the theater culture in any city, in any part of the world, and over the decades, there's a large component of gay people. That's an outlet where whatever they had to be in the daytime, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, all the way up, the kind of day straight they would have to be, they could enjoy being someone, anyone. All of us do this in theater. We transform the stage and ourselves into whatever's necessary to tell the story. Bill Kendall graduated from Rhodes in 1945 and was a well-known figure in Memphis, especially in the film exhibition world. His movie theater, the Guild, had been around since the 20s, but when he was managing it, it was mostly on through the 60s into the 70s. And it was an art house. It's where we went to see foreign films. It's where we went to see revivals of Hollywood greats. He usually played the old split week he would have well known growing up. So Monday through Wednesday there would be one type of film, maybe a replay of an early film. And then Thursday through Sunday he would have the more current films. Bill was always well dressed. I never saw him when he wasn't in a coat and tie or a suit. He took pride in his exhibition of the films that he had. Bill was a character. He was fun, he was smart, he was elegant. He saw a way to introduce not just foreign films, some of which were a little spicy for the taste of the time, but he was a film exhibitor past the censorship of Mr. Benford, the infamous Mr. Benford, who for 35, 40 years decided what Memphis could see. He was part of the Crump regime, and he edited movies. If he didn't like something, he thought it was too naughty for Memphis to see. This was movies in the 40s and 50s, and that was over. He had been retired and I think passed away. Bill found a niche market. In the late 60s, he would have what I guess we could generously describe as stag movies. They were, I guess, 35 millimeter. But he wanted to have an option for gay Memphis to see these kinds of films. They weren't available in any other way. There was no video, there was no cable. So he invented a system called the Lavender Cinema. And this took place, I think, at midnight. You had to buy a membership, and then that included access to the movies, and of course it was thought to be exciting because we got to go to the theater. You may have seen a movie in that afternoon or evening, but you got to go see a gay movie. And it was within the limits of the law because it was a private showing for a select group. I don't know what the police thought about it or what was said about it, but it went on for a short time. All of us decided to go and see what it was, what we were going to get to see in these gay movies. Another thing that Bill Kendall would be said to have encouraged for the gay community was the very first Gay Miss Memphis contest. And this sort of thing had been very much looked down upon by the community. The police were brought in to break up anything that looked like it was going to be a coalition of gays, especially people in drag. This was just something they couldn't manage. Well, the bright idea came that if we staged this on Halloween, this was before I came, but if they staged this on Halloween, people dressing up in whatever kind of costume would be, well, it wouldn't be questioned.
It was held on Halloween of 1969, just a few months after Stonewall. And people were really terrified, but the place was full, including plants from the Vice Squad. But it was Halloween, and they couldn't arrest anybody.
It has now become a landmark representation of the will of people to do something that is not seen as normative and not endorsed, but in its way, no real harm to anybody.
Now, going back to the 50s and 60s, they were physique magazines, and there wasn't any genital nudity, but the porn that was available, that was distributed early on, was physique magazine. Now, I don't know about lesbian porn, but it was bodybuilders, basically, and some was on film, and some was in print form. The first adult theater was, I think, where Rayford's daughter's disco is now, on 2nd Street. And then one popped up next door to it, and suddenly they were popping up like toadstools in a number of places. And they sold marital aids, which are sex toys. And some of them had private viewing booths, which were arcades. And technically, you're supposed to go in there and lock the door and pay your money and take your choice. Most of them, those locations were arcades. And again, that's why we distributed the gay newspapers there, because that's where you could find gay people, gay men, for the most part.
And that revolution played out here at Rhodes as well, because students who might not have felt comfortable identifying as gay and would be careful about how they're perceived and working very hard to appear to be part of the straight culture, were loosening up to feeling like, well, I think I can be more myself. I won't have to hide so much of what I feel. And that began with everything else that was going on. The time I was here was 67 to 71. So in the spring of my freshman year, Dr. King's assassination took place. It was a shattering event for the world, but certainly for those of us living here and those of us who were in the marches protesting the treatment of our sanitation workers. I ended up not being in a march, but I worked with groups, campus student groups, who sourced food and money for the families of these people who were striking. They didn't make much money anyway, but when they were deliberately not working, our concern was for their families. So we spent long hours working with a church across the street, Evergreen Church, and with other churches helping to get food to these families. And they were helping to deliver it, we were helping to source it. The chaos continued with the murder of Robert Kennedy in June of that year. Then the Democratic National Convention was just a terrific mess. The protests, the riots, and daily horrors coming off from that in August. So 68 was a watershed year. On into our time here, there would be other reasons for us to have stresses, especially the men students. In December of 69, we all learned what our draft number would be. And being July 7th, mine was 50, I think. So each year, each month, you would see how many people were being called up, and that was extraordinarily stressful to be called up and to go through the physical and that whole thing. As it turned out, with flat feet and a bad back, I was not who they were looking for, but I probably wouldn't have been anyway if we could have described me more fully.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in Atlanta.
Bobby Campbell of San Francisco and Billy Walker of New York both suffer from a mysterious, newly discovered disease which affects mostly homosexual men, but has also been found in heterosexual men and women.
Gay cancer was the result of HIV that was technically Kaposi's sarcoma. The ones where you got these little bruises or cancers all over your body. And it had been mostly a disease found in the elderly. When very young people started to get it due to a compromised immune system, that was what gay cancer was. And it was weird. Ronald Reagan was president. It was totally and utterly ignored because gay men were expendable. And Ronald Reagan was a Republican. And we were on our own. There was a group called Blood Sisters, since women were much less prone to contracting HIV, especially lesbians, who built up a blood supply for transfusions that could be tapped into by anyone who needed one. Because in the beginning, blood was not as strictly controlled as it has been since they finally started doing it. And there were a number of people who died from tainted transfusions and got HIV that way. 2 women that I talk about often, 2 transgender women back in the 80s and 90s, died from tainted blood during their surgery. That's how they got HIV. So it was fairly common, and they had to really clamp down on the blood supply. They were beautiful. A lot of them were very, very beautiful. Smart, own businesses, creative actors. I don't think, and this is 2021, they're supposed to take blood from me even now because I've had sex with men. I've never tested HIV positive. But they don't want to take any chances because it was very common.
And then to look at the damage done from just this last year is, you can imagine how someone my age feels. It's doubly troubling that all the work gone into by a generation ago, I understand that, can't be seen to have a more lasting impact. Things have changed. Leadership has changed. We have people of color in society in ways that have never been seen before. And Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement have seen enormous changes with women, with people of color. It's heartening to see that change, but the clear message is this problem is not gone and it's not over. And all of us, whatever age we are, have to continue endlessly to work toward equity and inclusion and making the world where everybody can be at the table, whoever you are.